So I'm not like a huge aviation nerd or anything. I've never flown a real plane. I don't know all the different models of, if it's not like a fighter jet or a bomber or some military aircraft, I couldn't tell you the difference between a Cessna and a Diamond. But I have a lot of interest in this Microsoft Flight Simulator. It really caught my attention as soon as I saw some of the early, like, pre-release footage of this a few months ago. And honestly, part of it is just how gorgeous this game looks. And I do find it relaxing to just fly around. Not necessarily have too many things pre-planned or, following all the rules for, ATC. I don't take it too seriously, but I can, take off, I can land. But I just really enjoy flying around and just, enjoying the scenery. It's very relaxing. Obviously the big deal about this game is that, like, realistically, you can fly anywhere in the world. It has pretty much every airport in the world in this game. Even the really small airports are in this game because the whole world is in this game. It uses a combination of satellite imagery and artificial intelligence and some, I guess I was going to say pre-rendered, but like pre-designed, airports and details like that. So it mixes us all together in a way that you can literally fly anywhere in the world and see anything. You can see your house in this game, because again, it's using satellite imagery. If it doesn't have satellite imagery, it will use AI. Kind of even I think with the satellite imagery, it's using AI to sort of put the trees in. Sometimes the trees aren't really where trees are in real life, but it just knows, there's a fair bit of trees here, there's a little scattering of trees there, and the AI just kind of plops it all in. The AI can put textures on houses, so sometimes your house might have the real satellite imagery texture on it, or it might have like an AI, just sort of like a generic looking house, in which case it's just like, there's a house here. It might not actually look like what your house looks like, but it's just a gorgeous game. I really love how good they did the detail on the planes. When you get up close to these things, the reflections, you can see the landing gear reflecting off the bottom of the wings. You can even sometimes see, if you're over, a street with houses, you can sometimes sort of see that reflection in the bottom of the plane. And it's not using ray tracing. I think they said that it might eventually support ray tracing, but they put so much work into it. This is an argument for why you don't need ray tracing. This looks really good. Sometimes the reflections in the plane, I would swear it is ray tracing, but it's obviously not. I don't even have a video card capable of ray tracing. And speaking of the computer side of things, this is a game, obviously, that, historically flight simulators have always been pretty hard to run. You've needed a pretty beefy CPU in the really early ones, and then as they got more graphically advanced, you needed a decent graphics card. So a lot of people are, joking that this is like the new crisis of 2020. It's really hard to run smooth on ultra settings now, but it's a game that obviously it's going to be around for a long time. The last Microsoft Flight Simulator, I think, was like 2007 or 2009, and so obviously it's going to be around for a while. It's going to get updates as time goes on. You're going to add more planes, going to add, maybe like ray tracing, like I said. So this is a game that can push your PC for years to come. And, I did some upgrading to my PC. I'm just running a Ryzen 2600, so sort of a mid-range processor. Certainly not a high-end processor. I had an RX 570, and I only play at 1080p, and so I'm okay if I can play most games on medium. And with the RX 570, I could. I was, the last couple games I played, medium settings, or high, even a lot of times. It's just 1080p. You don't need that much power. until you get like, 1440p and ray tracing and all this stuff, and then you need ridiculous amounts of power. And I've always just kind of been a little chill on that, I don't think people should need to buy. I live in Canada, so like a 2080 Ti is $1,600 or $1,700. I've never been one for chasing these super high-end video cards. I think it's ridiculous that people think they need that. I don't know. On the one hand, I guess if it's your hobby and that's what you want, I fine. But like, we shouldn't feel as PC gamers that we need $1,500, $1,600 graphics cards. That's how I feel about it. When I work in this industry, I sell graphics cards on a daily basis. And I can tell you, most people are buying, 1660s, 2060s, 2070 Supers. The most popular high-end card I sell on a daily basis is a 2070 Super. And most people aren't buying the 2080 Super or the 2080 Ti. Anyways, I had to upgrade for this myself, so the RX 570 really would have struggled with this game on low, and I wanted to run it on at least medium or high, so I bought a 5600 XT. I'm a bit of an AMD fanboy. If I was selling a graphics card to a customer, I would have recommended the 1660 Super or the 2060 pretty much all day long. From a customer's point of view, the driver support's better. They run a little bit cooler. There's really no reason to buy the 5600 XT. I think it's overpriced for what it is. A 1660 Super is almost just as fast, and it's $100 less. Or in some cases, you can get a 2060 on sale for the same price that a regular 5600 XT is going for. And you shouldn't be paying the same price for a 2060, or you shouldn't be paying the same price for a 5600 XT, I should say. The 2060 has ray tracing. It's got the tensor cores and the DLSS and all that stuff, and that's what you're paying for. You're going to pay a premium if you want ray tracing. If you don't want ray tracing, you buy a 1660 Ti. It's basically the same card as a 2060 without the ray tracing. But you're going to pay a premium to get the ray tracing. You shouldn't be paying the same amount for a 5600 XT. And that's even just ignoring the fact that historically AMD is the budget option. And that works with the 5700 XT. The 5700 XT is as fast as a 2070 Super in the right game. You could look at a dozen games and, on 6 of those games, the 2070 Super is going to be a bit faster. It might be 10% faster here or 15% faster there. But in those other 6 games, the 5700 XT can hang with the 2070 Super, and it's $200 less. And that's kind of what you expect with AMD. You're like, yeah, it does run pretty hot. Yeah, the drivers aren't quite as good, but it's $200 less and it performs the same. My 5600 XT here, surprisingly, isn't too bad. It's runs at about 80 degrees on the GPU temperature, and 85 maybe on the T-junction, which is I've seen the T-junction on 5700 XTs hit 100 degrees Celsius. So yeah, this one really doesn't run too hot. It's only drawing 150 watts. The Sapphire Pulse isn't really one of the highly overclocked cards, and it's very well built, so it has a good cooler on it for the kind of power levels it's expected to hit. So it's a well built card. It's just a single 8-pin power connector on it, and it's almost as fast as a 2060. I think it's faster than a 1660 Super. It's maybe in between a 1660 Super and a 2060, but again, for that performance level, in my opinion, it should be cheaper. AMD really should lower the price on the 5600 XT. But I'm an AMD fanboy, like I said, so I have to support my brand. I didn't want to have an NVIDIA graphics card in my system, even though I'll admit they're great cards. They're arguably better in many ways, no doubt about it. Just personally, I want to run AMD on AMD CPU, AMD GPU. And then I also upgraded my my hard drive to an SSD. Specifically, I mean my game drive. So I have a small 256 gigabyte M.2 drive. That's the boot drive. So it has Windows installed on it and programs like Adobe and the clients like Steam. But then the games themselves, I had a 1 terabyte 7200 RPM hard drive that the games themselves were installed onto. And so I swapped that for a 1 terabyte SSD, just a SATA SSD. So I still have the 256 gig M.2, and then I have a 1 terabyte SATA SSD. And so the games are installed on that now. It's highly recommended, I think, for Flight Simulator that you have an SSD. The load times are very long in this game, and there is a lot of data streaming in as you're playing this game. It's using your internet connection to download satellite imagery and all that stuff while you're playing. But yeah, it's not too heavy on the CPU, surprisingly, even with just my 2600. I've seen a lot of times where I'm playing the game and it's just like 40 to 50% CPU usage, but the GPU usage, the VRAM, is maxed out. My 16 gigabytes of system RAM is maxed out. So the game likes GPU power, and the game likes RAM. But again, it's gorgeous, and I'm actually playing it on Ultra. So I was, expecting to play it on medium, maybe high. When I got the game installed, it actually right out of the box, it said, we recommend, based on your system, we recommend high. And so I was playing it on high for a little while, and then I thought, well, I'll try Ultra. Everyone says it's so hard to run on Ultra. Even people with 20... Now, they're mostly running at 1440p. People with 2080s. Again, I'm just running at 1080p. But it actually runs okay on Ultra. This game is hard to get a solid 60 anyway. The big trick in this game is to run it in like a full screen windowed mode, I think you would call it. And an easy way to do that is if you undock one of your like your VFR map or your objectives little box. If you undock that into a window, and you can drag it. If you have two monitors, you can actually drag it over to your second monitor, so you can have like your map or your objectives list on a second monitor, even though the 3D gameplay isn't on that monitor. And that will actually increase your frames. For me, it's about 15 to 20, sometimes 25 frame per second increase by doing that. And I got the idea from other people, so I saw a few other people that were saying that this worked, so I thought I would try it, and sure enough, it makes a big difference. Yeah, once I do that, and the game runs at 45, 50 frames per second on Ultra, so it's surprising actually. And again, that's maxing out my GPU and my RAM. As you can see, some of the footage I've shown you is on high, some of it has been on Ultra. And I should mention the trick to increase the frame rate with undocking one of those windows. It doesn't work when I'm recording. So any time I'm recording the footage, that's actually running quite a bit slower than it would be if I wasn't recording the footage. What happens when I undock, what I think is happening is the game's coming out of exclusive full screen mode, and it's going into like a borderless full screen windowed mode. And when it does that, my recording wants to record the second monitor instead of the first monitor. So you go from recording the gameplay footage to recording part of the desktop that you're just seeing on the second monitor. So unfortunately, I can't record while having the higher frame rate. I've got to drop the frame rate down while I'm recording, and then that's on top of any slight decrease in the frame rate due to recording. The extra little bit of processing power for recording. So yeah, you're going to see some spots where it looks really stuttery, and I'm not going to say the game's smooth when you're not recording, because even when I'm not recording, even with the frame rate increase, there's still some choppy sections, there's still frame rate drops, pretty severe drops occasionally. The game's not smooth. Again, the game is hard to run at a locked 60 or 60 plus all the time. And part of that is probably it's streaming stuff in as you're flying around. And so your internet speed might come into play, and the speed of their servers might come into play, and there's other things are coming into play. Obviously, the game likes a lot of RAM. I'm maxing out my 16 gigs of RAM, which I've never been playing a game before and seen my RAM 100%, you know. I can max out Doom on ultra settings. I can max out Wolfenstein 2 on high or even ultra settings, and it will not max out. You know, it might be using 14 out of my 16 gigs of RAM, but it's not maxing it out 100%. This is using every ounce of it. But it's very playable, though. That's the thing I should just leave off with. It's a very slow, obviously, it's a very slow-paced simulator. And, you know, even if you're running at 30 frames per second, you're moving around very slowly. It's very playable. Even at 30 frames per second, it's very, very playable. So you don't need to chase 60 in this game. If you can get rid of the large stutters, that's great. But, you know, if you're running at 40, 45 frames per second on average, that's fine. Oh, I almost forgot to mention controller. I'm using an Xbox One controller. I bought a Cyberpunk. Right now, it's hard. It's hard to, at least in Canada, with COVID and everyone's stuck at home and kids are stuck at home. It's hard to find video game systems and controllers. And so I went to Walmart and they didn't have any Xbox One controllers in stock at all. And I went to another store and they only had the Cyberpunk Special Edition one, which was $10 more than the regular one. But I needed it, and I didn't really care that it was the Cyberpunk Special Edition. Although one thing I gotta say, the back of this controller has like a slight rubberized texture on it. I don't think that's on the base controllers. I could be wrong. I don't own an Xbox One, but I don't think it had that texture on the back. So this might be slightly more comfortable and grippy than the base controller. So in that regard, it was worth the extra $10 if that's the case. I don't necessarily care that it's a Cyberpunk Special Edition though. But yeah, I bought that and like a $10, $15 little USB Bluetooth dongle. And I was pleasantly surprised with how easy that was to set up. I plugged in the USB dongle, and literally in 1 second, Windows was like, yeah, you got Bluetooth, and Bluetooth's turned on. And you just hit the pairing button you hold the pairing button down on the controller, and yeah, literally just a couple of seconds, and it was recognized as an Xbox One controller, and it works really, really good. Worked really, really good. The game plays really well with the controller. They obviously put a lot of thought into using an Xbox controller. The LNR triggers, the LNR analog triggers are your rudders. Your flaps are the LNR bumpers. And you obviously, the right analog stick looks around. And it's very precise. Like, you just need the absolute smallest little inputs on the controller. You know, the difference between not touching the stick and just literally just like a millimeter is sometimes all it takes. Very, very subtle controls work very well actually with the controller. But obviously this, works better with if you've got a full setup with a stick and throttles and rudder pedals, and you can go all out. It is a simulator, obviously, so a lot of people do just that. But again, I'm fine with just using the Xbox controller, a keyboard and mouse as well. So there's certain things I do on the mouse while playing. There's certain things I do on the keyboard. Certain buttons on the keyboard to do things that I can't do on the controller. It's been pretty good. I don't think it's ever crashed once. Maybe once. I think it crashed on me once. The game froze. But, I've put in probably 10 hours in the last couple days. Awesome game. I recommend it. It's not very often I pay full price for games. I'm kind of cheap that way. I fear a lot of times that I'm going to pay full price for a game and not play it, because there's a lot of times I start a game and I don't play it. And so I've oftentimes felt like I just wasted money doing that. But this one I bought at midnight on the 18th, the second it launched. I bought it. It was a 100 gigabyte download, so I let it go overnight and played it the next day.